Marianne Cole grew up with the quiet certainty that her life followed a cruel arithmetic. For every small moment of happiness, something heavier would come to claim it. She did not know when this belief first settled inside her, only that it had always been there, shaping the way she looked at the world. By the time she was old enough to name her fears, late autumn had already become the season she dreaded most. The shortening days, the brittle cold in the air, the way the sky seemed to press lower over the land, all of it carried a warning she could never quite escape. The fear traced back to a night she barely remembered in detail, but felt in her bones. Marianne had been a child then, living in a modest house in rural eastern Washington, where life moved slowly and families depended on one another to get through long winters. That evening, her parents had left her at home with her grandmother, deciding not to take their young daughter along to a family birthday celebration several towns away. The roads were slick with early ice, and they expected to return late. It seemed like a sensible choice at the time. Sometime after midnight, the phone rang. Marianne remembered the sound more than anything else, the shrill insistence cutting through the quiet house. She remembered her grandmother rising from her chair, moving toward the hallway phone, and the brief moment of silence that followed when the receiver was lifted. What came next was chaos. Her grandmother collapsed before she could say a word. By the time Marianne reached her, the woman who had always seemed unbreakable lay unconscious on the floor. The car accident had been severe. Her parents survived, but only narrowly. Doctors later explained that it was a miracle they were alive at all. The miracle came with a cost. Marianne's mother suffered a traumatic brain injury that left her memory damaged in ways that grew worse with time. Some days she could remember names and faces. Other days she struggled with the simplest tasks. Her father was less fortunate still. A shattered spine left him permanently paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, plagued by chronic pain that no medication ever fully relieved. From that night on, the shape of Marianne's childhood changed completely. The household's fragile stability rested on her grandmother's shoulders. Government disability payments covered little more than basic necessities, and specialized treatment was far beyond what the family could afford. Medical appointments, medications, and daily care became part of their routine. Marianne watched her grandmother age under the strain, even as she tried to shield her granddaughter from the worst of it. But children notice more than adults think. Marianne learned early how to be careful, how to stay quiet when her parents were exhausted, how to step in when her mother forgot what she was doing or when her father needed help adjusting his wheelchair. She learned how to read a room before speaking and how to measure her own needs against what the family could bear. While other children worried about school dances and weekend plans, Marianne worried about whether the heat would last through the winter and whether there would be enough money for prescriptions that month. Her grandmother never said it outright, but Marianne understood that she was being prepared. Prepared to help, prepared to endure, prepared to grow up before her time. She took on small responsibilities at first, fetching water, tidying rooms, watching over her mother when her memory failed her. Over time, those responsibilities grew heavier, until they shaped her days as much as school ever did. Late autumn returned each year like a reminder. The cold crept in, the roads glazed with ice again, and the memories sharpened. Marianne came to associate the season not with harvest or holidays, but with loss. It was as if the world itself had marked that time as hers to endure. By the time she reached adolescence, Marianne no longer expected life to be fair. She expected it to demand something from her and to keep demanding, no matter how much she had already given. The foundation of her future had been laid quietly, without drama or choice, built on sacrifice, steady endurance, and a sorrow she carried as if it had been handed down to her along with her name. As the years passed, the quiet struggle inside the Cole household deepened. Disability payments arrived on schedule each month, but they barely covered the essentials: medications, doctor visits, Transportation and basic utilities consumed nearly everything. There was never enough left over, and there was never a sense of security. Any unexpected expense, a broken appliance, a winter storm that drove heating costs higher, felt like a threat to the family's fragile balance. Marianne learned quickly that effort was the only currency she could control. While attending school, she began tutoring younger children in the neighborhood, helping them with reading and basic coursework for a few dollars an hour. On weekends and evenings, she cleaned homes, offices, anywhere someone was willing to pay cash. She never complained. She simply added each task to her day and adjusted her expectations of rest and youth accordingly. Her grandmother remained the heart of the family. She organized medical appointments, kept track of prescriptions, and managed the household finances with careful precision. When Marianne came home late from work or studying, her grandmother was often still awake, sorting paperwork at the kitchen table under a dim light. She never asked Marianne to do more, but she never stopped accepting the help either. They moved together in quiet coordination, bound by necessity and unspoken understanding. Then the headaches began. At first, her grandmother dismissed them as fatigue. She had earned the right to be tired, she said, smiling it away. But the headaches grew more frequent, sharper, accompanied by moments of dizziness and confusion that could not be ignored. A visit to the local clinic led to referrals, scans, and finally a diagnosis that left no room for optimism. The doctors explained that she suffered from a serious neurological condition that could only be treated through complex surgery. Without it, the decline would be inevitable. The cost was staggering. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket expenses were far beyond what the family could manage. Worse still were the waiting lists. Specialists were overbooked, operating rooms scarce, and priority given to patients with better coverage or more aggressive advocates. Marianne listened as the words settled into the room, heavy and final. Her grandmother listened too, calm and composed, as if she had already accepted what the rest of them were still struggling to understand. Marianne refused to accept it. She traveled to the city alone, clutching medical records and scan results, moving from one office to another in search of someone who might help. She waited for hours in sterile corridors, repeating the same story to administrators and physicians who barely looked up from their screens. Some spoke kindly but firmly about policy and scheduling. Others were blunt, explaining that even patients with substantial financial resources waited months, sometimes years, for the procedure her grandmother needed. By the end of the day, Marianne understood what no one had explicitly said. There would be no exception for them. She returned home exhausted, carrying a weight she did not yet know how to set down. Her grandmother listened as Marianne described what she had been told, then reached out and took her hand. She spoke gently without bitterness, saying that some things could not be fought into submission. What mattered, she said, was how they lived with the time they were given. Winter came early that year. The first snow arrived quietly, settling over the land in a thin, uncertain layer. Not long after, her grandmother's condition worsened. There were fewer good days and more moments of weakness. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, she passed away in her sleep. The funeral brought the small community together. Former students, neighbors, and colleagues remembered her as a dedicated teacher and a steady presence in their lives. Marianne stood beside her parents, accepting condolences with numb politeness. Inside, something had gone hollow. With her grandmother's death, the family lost not only its emotional center, but also a portion of its already limited income. The house felt emptier, quieter, stripped of the person who had held everything together. In the weeks that followed, guilt settled heavily on Marianne's shoulders. She replayed every decision, every unanswered question, wondering if she could have done more. Her parents, each trapped in their own limitations, leaned on her more than ever. She did not resist. Responsibility had long since stopped feeling optional. By early winter, the Cole family was reduced to 3, Marianne and her disabled parents, standing on uncertain ground. The loss had not broken them outright, but it had left them thinner, weaker, and more vulnerable than before. For Marianne, it marked the end of whatever remained of her childhood and the beginning of a life defined by endurance rather than choice. Marianne graduated with strong academic results, the kind earned through discipline rather than ease. Teachers praised her focus and reliability, often remarking that she seemed older than her years. With no money for college and no time to grieve what she could not afford, Marianne accepted a position at the local library. It was modest work, quiet, predictable, and close to home, but it offered stability. For the first time in years, her days followed a rhythm not dictated by medical emergencies or financial panic. That was where she met Nicholas. He appeared one afternoon while she was shelving returned books, asking for help locating a history volume he claimed was required reading. He spoke softly, thanked her more than necessary, and returned the book with care days later. Their conversations began like that, brief, cautious, unremarkable. Nicholas did not rush her, and Marianne did not know how to be rushed. Over time, familiarity replaced formality. He lingered longer at the counter. She remembered his name without checking the card. Nicholas was attentive in ways that felt almost unreal to her. He listened when she spoke and remembered small details, things she was used to keeping to herself. He never pushed, never asked questions she was not ready to answer. When he learned about her parents, he did not retreat or offer hollow sympathy. He simply accepted it as part of her life. Their relationship grew slowly, deliberately, as if both of them were afraid that moving too fast would break something fragile. They walked together after work, shared meals when they could afford them, and spoke about the future in careful, conditional terms. Marianne allowed herself to imagine a life not defined entirely by obligation, a home where she was not always bracing for the next loss. For the first time, hope did not feel reckless. Then Nicholas received his draft notice. The letter arrived quietly without drama, but it changed everything. He was called for mandatory military service, with a departure date set months in advance. Marianne read the notice beside him, her chest tightening as the words settled in. Nicholas promised it would not change anything. He spoke of letters, phone calls, and plans waiting on the other side of his service. They promised each other patience and loyalty, sketching out a future that felt suddenly distant but still reachable. The months before his departure passed too quickly. When the day came, Marianne watched him leave with a composure she had learned long ago. She told herself she had endured worse, that waiting was something she knew how to do. At first, he wrote often. His letters were short but reassuring, filled with ordinary details meant to keep her grounded. Marianne responded carefully, choosing her words with the same care she gave everything else. Over time, the letters grew less frequent. Then they stopped entirely. She told herself there were explanations, training schedules, restricted communication exhaustion. Weeks passed, then months. Marianne continued to write, even when no replies came. Eventually, she stopped. Nicholas returned home without warning. Marianne did not hear it from him. She learned by accident, standing in line at a grocery store when she overheard two women discussing an upcoming wedding. The groom's name caught her attention. The bride's family name followed, one well known in the area for its influence and wealth. The truth reached her fully on the day of the wedding. Curiosity and disbelief drove her past the church, where decorations lined the entrance and guests gathered in polished attire. She stood at a distance unseen and watched Nicholas step out of a car in a tailored suit, smiling easily as he greeted the bride's family. The woman beside him wore white and carried herself with confidence Marianne had never been allowed to learn. In that moment, something inside Marianne broke, cleanly without sound. Nicholas never looked for her. He never explained. He simply replaced the life they had planned with one that offered comfort and status. Marianne walked away before the ceremony began, carrying with her the quiet realization that love, like fairness, was not guaranteed. The hope she had allowed herself to feel dissolved, leaving behind a lesson she would not forget. After the wedding, Marianne moved through her days as if through fog. Every familiar street, every quiet corner of town carried traces of what had been lost. The library, once a place of calm routine, now reminded her of conversations that had meant nothing in the end. Even home offered no refuge. The walls held the echoes of her grandmother's voice, the weight of responsibility, and now the sharp knowledge that love, when it failed, did so without explanation or apology. It was her friends who first spoke the idea aloud. They were planning to leave town, to try their luck closer to Portland, where work was rumored to be plentiful and anonymity easier to find. They invited Marianne to come with them, not as a grand promise, but as an option, a way out. At first, she resisted. Her parents depended on her. The thought of leaving them behind felt like another form of betrayal. But her parents surprised her. Her father spoke slowly, choosing his words with care, reminding her that she had already given more than most people ever would. Her mother, in one of her clearer moments, took Marianne's hands and told her that staying out of guilt would only hollow her out further. They insisted she try. They promised they would manage, even if the promise was built more on love than certainty. Marianne packed lightly. There was little she could not leave behind. The move was abrupt and disorienting. The outskirts of Portland were louder, faster, and less forgiving than anything she had known. Traffic never seemed to stop. People moved with purpose, rarely meeting one another's eyes. The city did not pause to notice her arrival, and for the first time, that invisibility felt like a kind of mercy. Reality set in quickly. Without a college degree or specialized training, Marianne's options were limited. She applied everywhere she could: cafes, retail stores, offices willing to hire clerical help. Each rejection landed quietly but accumulated heavily. Employers glanced at her resume, asked polite questions, and explained that they were looking for someone with more experience. Weeks passed. Her savings thinned. The city's promise of opportunity revealed its cost. She learned how to wait in crowded lobbies, how to read disappointment in a receptionist's smile, how to walk back to her shared apartment without letting frustration show. At night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of traffic and distant sirens, wondering if she had made a mistake she could not undo. Eventually, necessity pushed her toward an employment agency she had been avoiding. The office was cramped, filled with outdated furniture and the quiet anxiety of people waiting their turn. The agent who met with her skimmed her file and nodded, unsurprised by the gaps and limitations. There was, the woman said, one option available immediately. It was a live-in housekeeping position. The estate belonged to a wealthy family outside the city, near Lake Oswego. The work would be demanding, the schedule strict, and the expectations high. Privacy was limited. Independence would be minimal. In return, the position offered steady pay, room and board, stability if nothing else. Marianne hesitated only briefly. Stability was what she needed most. A place where the rules were clear, where effort translated directly into survival. She signed the paperwork without asking too many questions, accepting conditions that would have unsettled her before. At this point, unsettled was already familiar. When she called her parents that night, she framed the decision carefully, emphasizing the security it offered. Her father listened in silence. Her mother told her to be careful and to remember who she was. Marianne promised she would. As she prepared to leave the city apartment and travel to the estate, Marianne allowed herself a narrow, cautious hope. Not for happiness, not yet, but for order. For a chance to rebuild herself quietly, piece by piece, in a place where her past could not reach her so easily. The Caldwell estate stood apart from everything Marianne had known, set behind iron gates and tall evergreens. It rose from the landscape with deliberate distance, as if designed to keep the rest of the world at arm's length. The driveway curved through manicured grounds before revealing the house itself. Large, restrained, and meticulously maintained. Nothing about it felt welcoming. It felt controlled. Marianne arrived early in the morning, carrying a single suitcase and the quiet resolve she had learned to rely on. She was met at the service entrance by Victoria Hargreave, the estate manager, a woman whose posture alone suggested authority. Victoria did not smile. She inspected Marianne briefly, her gaze sharp and measuring, then gestured for her to follow. Introductions were efficient and impersonal. Richard and Margaret Caldwell were away on business, Victoria explained, their schedules demanding and unpredictable. They were powerful figures in the grain shipping and logistics industry, owners of assets that stretched far beyond the region. Their absence was treated as normal, expected. The household functioned regardless. Their son, Ethan Caldwell, lived at the estate as well. Victoria mentioned him only in passing. Her tone neutral. Marianne registered the name without attaching meaning to it. At that moment, Ethan remained abstract, another part of the house's hierarchy, distant and irrelevant to her work. Victoria led Marianne through the estate with brisk precision. There were rules for everything. Which hallway staff were permitted to use, which doors were never to be opened, which rooms required daily attention, and which were to be entered only upon direct instruction. Schedules were strict. Privacy was absolute. Mistakes were not tolerated. Marianne listened carefully, memorizing details without interrupting. This kind of structure was familiar to her. It mirrored the system she had grown up navigating, quiet, demanding, unforgiving of weakness. She nodded when required and asked no unnecessary questions. Her room was small but clean, tucked away in the servants' quarters. It contained a narrow bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the grounds. It was more than adequate. More importantly, it was predictable. From her first day, Marianne worked with quiet efficiency. She rose early, completed her tasks thoroughly, and stayed out of the way. Cleaning, laundry, organizing. Each duty followed a rhythm, she quickly learned. She avoided drawing attention to herself, keeping her movements unobtrusive and her presence minimal. It was an instinct she had refined over years of living carefully. Victoria watched her closely. At first, the estate manager corrected Marianne often, pointing out minor errors, testing her responses. Marianne accepted every correction without defensiveness. She adjusted quickly, learning how Victoria preferred things done and anticipating expectations before they were voiced. Over time, the corrections grew fewer. Approval, when it came, was subtle, a nod, a task assigned without commentary. Marianne recognized it for what it was. The Caldwells' absence gave the house an unusual stillness. Staff members moved through their duties with practiced detachment, rarely speaking unless necessary. Marianne learned their routines, their silences, and the unspoken rule that personal lives did not exist within the estate's walls. Ethan Caldwell appeared sporadically. Marianne saw him, first from a distance, crossing the main hall while she worked in an adjacent room. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with careless confidence. He did not look at her. To him, she was indistinct, interchangeable with the house itself. Their paths crossed occasionally after that, brief, unremarkable encounters in which he passed without acknowledgement. Marianne did not mind. Invisibility was safer. She focused on her work, finding comfort in the routine. Each completed task reinforced a fragile sense of control she had been missing since leaving home. At night, she returned to her room exhausted but calm, writing short letters to her parents and assuring them she was managing well. She did not mention the house's scale or the unspoken tension that lingered in its corridors. Weeks passed, and Marianne settled fully into her role. Victoria's scrutiny softened into expectation. Trust, such as it existed, was granted conditionally. Marianne did not overstep it. She remained, as all staff were meant to be, unseen. What Marianne could not know was that this very invisibility, her silence, her restraint, her presence without resistance, was already being noticed, and that within the estate's carefully controlled order, something was shifting quietly toward her. The shift was gradual enough that Marianne questioned it at first. Ethan Caldwell's presence, once distant and unremarkable, began to intrude on the careful boundaries she had built around herself. He lingered in rooms longer than necessary, asked questions unrelated to the household's operations, and watched her in a way that made her aware of her own movements. His tone remained casual, almost polite, but there was an edge beneath it that she could not name without acknowledging what it meant. At first, the attention came disguised as familiarity, a comment about her efficiency, a remark about how quiet she was compared to the rest of the staff. Marianne responded with brief, professional answers and kept moving. She adjusted her routines, choosing routes that minimized contact and completing tasks during hours when she was less likely to encounter him. She had learned long ago that avoidance was often safer than confrontation. Ethan did not withdraw. His comments grew more personal, his presence less coincidental. He appeared late at night when most of the staff had retired, leaning casually against door frames as if the estate belonged to him in ways that went beyond ownership. He asked where she was from, how old she was, whether she missed home. When she answered minimally, he smiled, as if her restraint amused him. Marianne understood the imbalance instinctively. Ethan was the son of the estate's owners. His word carried weight. Hers did not. She had seen how power moved quietly in places like this, how rules bent around those who could afford to break them. Speaking out felt dangerous, almost naive. So she endured, telling herself that if she remained cautious enough, invisible enough, the attention would fade. Instead, it sharpened. One evening, as she finished her duties and prepared to return to her room, Ethan blocked her path in a narrow corridor. He stood too close, forcing her to step back. His voice dropped, his words no longer masked by pretense. He spoke of favors and expectations, of how easily someone like her could be replaced. He suggested consequences without naming them, letting implication do the work. Marianne managed to step past him without answering. Her hands shook as she closed herself into her room that night, heart racing. She did not sleep. She weighed options she did not have, measuring silence against risk until morning came. The assault happened weeks later, on a night when the estate was unusually quiet. Victoria had left early, and the Caldwells were away. Marianne stayed late to finish a task that could not be postponed. When she turned to leave a storage area, she realized too late that she was not alone. Ethan stepped out from behind a door and closed it behind him, cutting off the corridor. He spoke calmly, as if they were having a private conversation rather than standing on the edge of something irreversible. Marianne tried to leave. He blocked her. The space was too small, the exit too far. She told him no, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. He laughed softly, dismissively, and reached for her. What followed shattered the careful order she had built to survive. Ethan used his strength and the isolation of the estate to his advantage, ignoring her resistance and her pleas. The assault was brief but brutal in its certainty, leaving no room for misunderstanding. When it was over, Marianne slid to the floor, her body rigid, her mind struggling to remain present. Ethan adjusted his clothing without urgency. He told her, calmly, what would happen next. If she spoke, she would lose her job. If she went to the authorities, he would make sure no one believed her. He spoke of lawyers, of influence, of how easily her past could be reshaped into something shameful. He reminded her of her parents, of how dependent they were on her income. He described in precise terms the ruin he could bring down on her life. Then he left, as if nothing had occurred. Marianne remained on the floor long after the sound of his footsteps faded. When she finally stood, She moved mechanically, cleaning herself and returning to her room with practiced silence. There were no visible marks she could point to, no witnesses she could name. The estate swallowed the incident whole, leaving no trace behind. In the days that followed, Marianne functioned as expected. She completed her tasks, avoided attention, and responded when spoken to. Victoria noticed nothing unusual. The routines of the house continued uninterrupted, indifferent to what had happened within its walls. Inside, Marianne withdrew. She stopped writing letters. She ate only when necessary. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by memories she could not control. Every sound startled her. Every unexpected presence sent a wave of fear through her body. She avoided Ethan as much as possible, though his occasional, knowing glances made it clear that avoidance was temporary, conditional. Marianne understood now that the estate was no longer a place of stability. It was a trap she could not leave without consequence. Silence had not protected her, it had marked her. She carried the weight of the assault alone, isolated by fear and the certainty that speaking out would cost her everything she still had. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, Marianne lived in constant terror, measuring each step, each breath, against a threat that hung unspoken but ever-present in the air. The weeks after the assault passed in a blur that Marianne experienced more as endurance than time. She moved through the estate on instinct, completing her duties with the same precision as before, though the meaning had drained from everything. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and learned to anticipate Ethan's movements well enough to stay out of his path. Silence became her shield, thin and imperfect, but the only one she had. Then her body began to betray what her voice could not say. At first, she dismissed the symptoms as stress. Fatigue had long been a constant companion. Nausea came and went, easily explained away by lack of sleep and irregular meals. When her cycle failed to arrive, Marianne told herself it was another consequence of fear. Another way trauma distorted the ordinary rhythms of life. The truth revealed itself anyway. She stood alone in the small bathroom of the servants' quarters, staring at the result with a stillness that felt almost calm. The world did not tilt or shatter. Instead, everything narrowed to a single, undeniable fact. She was pregnant. For a long time, Marianne did nothing. She sat on the edge of the tub, holding the test in her hands, her thoughts moving in careful circles. The fear was immediate and overwhelming, but beneath it ran something else, an instinctive, stubborn clarity. Whatever had been taken from her, this was now part of her body, part of her life. She knew she could not hide it for long. When she told Ethan, she chose a moment when no one else was nearby. Her voice remained steady as she spoke, stripped of accusation and expectation. She did not ask for kindness. She asked only for acknowledgement, for responsibility. In that instant, some small part of her still believed that truth, once spoken, carried weight. Ethan's reaction was immediate and absolute. The color drained from his face as the words settled in. Panic replaced confidence, sharp and uncontrolled. He demanded confirmation, demanded to know how far along she was, demanded details he did not deserve. He paced the room, swearing under his breath, calculating consequences faster than Marianne could follow. His father, he explained, was preparing to enter a political race. Visibility was increasing. Scrutiny would follow. Any scandal, especially one involving sexual assault and an unplanned pregnancy, would be catastrophic. Ethan did not frame it as a moral failure. He framed it as a logistical problem. His solution came quickly. He offered money, more than Marianne had ever seen at one time. He spoke of discretion, of private clinics, of how easily the situation could be handled if she cooperated. He told her it was the sensible choice, the only choice. He promised that once it was over, she could leave the estate quietly with enough money to start over somewhere else. Marianne listened without interrupting. When she refused, the atmosphere shifted. She told him she would not terminate the pregnancy. She did not raise her voice or plead. She simply stated it as fact. Ethan stared at her, disbelief hardening into something colder. He warned her again, this time without pretense. He described what would happen if she persisted. He reminded her of the power his family held and the ease with which he could destroy her credibility. Marianne did not change her answer. The weeks that followed were tense and watchful. Ethan avoided her publicly, but she felt his attention everywhere, in the timing of her assignments, in the way doors closed too quietly behind her. She sensed that the problem, as he saw it, had not been resolved, only postponed. One evening, after a long day of work, Ethan approached her with unexpected calm. He apologized. He spoke of stress, of fear, of mistakes made in panic. He told her he wanted to help her make arrangements, to drive her to a medical appointment where she could discuss her options with professionals. His voice was controlled, almost gentle. Marianne hesitated. She recognized the danger even as exhaustion dulled her instincts. But she also understood the cost of refusal. The estate had become a narrowing corridor with fewer exits each day. Against her better judgment, she agreed to go. The car ride began in silence. The city lights faded as they drove farther from the estate, toward a stretch of road Marianne did not recognize. The river appeared ahead of them, dark and expansive beneath the night sky. A sudden heaviness settled in her chest, sharp and immediate. She did not have time to react. The dizziness came without warning. Her vision blurred, her limbs growing heavy as if gravity itself had shifted. She tried to speak, to reach for the door, but her body no longer obeyed. Ethan watched her carefully as the drug took hold, his expression unreadable. When he stopped the car near the bridge, Marianne was barely conscious. The cold air hit her briefly as he pulled her from the vehicle. She felt the night, the wind, the sound of water below, then nothing solid at all. The last sensation she registered was weightlessness, followed by the shock of freezing water closing over her. Ethan did not wait to see her surface. He returned to the car and drove away, certain that the river would finish what he had started. The Columbia River moved swiftly beneath the bridge, dark and unforgiving. To him, it was the simplest solution, a problem erased. No witnesses, no consequences. For Marianne, the world dissolved into cold and silence as her body disappeared beneath the surface, carrying with it a life that had never been given a chance to begin. Marianne did not know how long she drifted in the river. Time ceased to exist, reduced to cold and darkness pressing in from every direction. Her body moved without her consent, carried by a current that did not care whether she lived or disappeared beneath the surface forever. Consciousness flickered in and out. Each returned shorter than the last, until even pain dissolved into numbness. She would have died there if not for chance. Frank Miller had been fishing that evening, as he often did when the season allowed. He was an old man, weathered by decades along the riverbanks, living alone in a small shack not far from the water. The river was familiar to him in a way cities never were. Its moods, its sounds, the way it carried debris differently depending on the wind and temperature. That night, something was wrong. He noticed movement where there should have been none. At first, he thought it was driftwood caught in the current. But the shape was wrong, too smooth, too human. Frank did not hesitate. He maneuvered his boat with surprising speed for a man his age, reaching the figure just as it began to slip under again. With numb fingers and a strength born of urgency, he hauled Marianne from the water. She was barely breathing. Frank wrapped her in his coat, soaked through within seconds, and rowed with everything he had toward the nearest place he knew would offer help without questions. There were no hospitals close enough, not in time. But there was the convent. The Benedictine convent stood quietly beyond the tree line, its stone walls weathered but solid, a place Frank had known for years. He often brought fish and game there, trading with the sisters for warm meals and basic supplies. When he struck the iron bell at the gate that night, he did so without restraint. Lights came on. Footsteps followed. Mother Agnes answered the door herself. She took one look at the unconscious young woman in Frank's arms and gave orders without hesitation. Marianne was carried inside, stripped of her frozen clothes, and placed near a roaring hearth while the sisters worked with calm efficiency. They did what they could, warming her body gradually, checking her pulse, whispering prayers under their breath. By morning, Marianne was alive. She spent days drifting between sleep and shallow consciousness as the effects of hypothermia worked through her system. A doctor was called when it became clear she would survive, though her condition was fragile. The medication, combined with trauma and prolonged exposure to the cold, took its toll. When she finally woke fully, something essential was missing. Marianne did not know her name. She stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, the pale stone walls, the quiet faces around her, and felt no recognition. Her mind reached for memory and found only blankness. Panic came quickly, sharp and disorienting, until Mother Agnes took her hand and spoke softly, grounding her in the present. The doctors explained it gently. Severe trauma, compounded by medication and physical shock, had caused dissociative amnesia. They could not say if her memory would return, or when. There was also the matter of the pregnancy. It was gone. The loss had occurred naturally during the night, her body overwhelmed beyond its limits. Marianne listened as this was explained to her, absorbing the words without context or emotion. She felt only a dull ache where something unnamed had once existed. When asked what she remembered, she shook her head. Nothing. Lacking any personal history to contradict it, Marianne assumed the simplest explanation. She believed she had tried to end her own life. The idea settled over her, like a verdict she did not contest. Shame followed, quiet and heavy, even though she could not remember the despair that might have driven her to it. Mother Agnes did not correct her. Instead, she offered Marianne a place to stay. The convent was not a prison, nor was it a sanctuary promised forever. It was simply a place of pause. Mother Agnes explained the rules with clarity. Work, prayer. Silence where appropriate. No vows were required. No pressure applied. Marianne could leave at any time. She chose to stay. Life in the convent moved according to rhythms older than memory. Mornings began before dawn with prayer. Days were filled with simple labor, cleaning, cooking, tending the grounds. Evenings returned to silence and reflection. Marianne adopted the routine instinctively, grateful for structure in a mind emptied of past and future. She wore plain clothing. Her hair was kept covered. The mirror showed her a face she did not recognize, but she accepted it without resistance. The sisters referred to her simply as Marianne, a name Mother Agnes had chosen after the saint whose feast day fell closest to her rescue. A year passed. In that time, Marianne did not reclaim her past, but she gained something else. Stillness, faith, a sense of belonging not tied to memory or obligation. She prayed not for answers, but for forgiveness, for a sin she believed she had committed, for a child she felt she had failed, though she could not remember either clearly. She lived quietly among the sisters, suspended between the life she had lost and the one she had not yet reclaimed, unaware that beyond the convent walls, the truth was waiting for her to remember. The memory returned without warning. Marianne had been sent into the city that afternoon to collect a sealed donation box from a charitable foundation that regularly supported the convent's outreach work. It was a simple errand, one she had completed many times over the past year. She moved through the lobby quietly, habit drawn low. Her attention focused on the task at hand. Then she saw the magazine. It lay casually on a glass table near the reception desk. Thick, glossy, unmistakably modern. A wedding special. Marianne would have walked past it if not for the name printed in bold across the cover. Ethan Caldwell. Her hand froze in midair. The air around her seemed to thin, the sounds of the lobby dulling to a distant hum. She picked up the magazine slowly, as though the pages might burn her skin. On the cover, Ethan stood in a tailored suit, smiling with practiced ease. Beside him, his bride-to-be leaned in, flawless and radiant, the image of a future carefully curated. The shock struck like a blade. In an instant, the wall inside her mind collapsed. Memory flooded back with violent clarity, the rural house, her parents' faces, her grandmother's voice, the library, Nicholas, the estate, Ethan's eyes, the locked room, the river, cold, so deep it felt endless. Panic rose and fell in a single breath as every missing piece slammed into place, complete and undeniable. Marianne staggered back, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. She remembered everything. There was no gradual adjustment, no soft return. The truth arrived whole, uncompromising. She did not cry. She did not scream. What surfaced first was not fear or grief, but a profound, focused stillness, a certainty that felt heavier than any prayer she had ever spoken. The wedding was scheduled for the following weekend. The article described it as a public celebration, part society event, part charitable gala. The Caldwell estate would open its gates to guests, donors, and members of the community. There would be music, speeches, and press coverage. Ethan's parents had framed it as a gesture of generosity, a union meant to symbolize legacy and respectability. Marianne closed the magazine. She returned to the convent in silence. That evening, she sought out Mother Agnes and told her the truth, what she remembered, who Ethan was, and what he had done. She did not ask for permission. She asked only for understanding. Mother Agnes listened without interruption. When Marianne finished, the older woman regarded her with quiet gravity. She did not counsel revenge or restraint. She simply acknowledged what had been taken from Marianne and what had been denied her. She reminded her that truth, once spoken, carried consequences beyond intention. Marianne already knew. On the day of the wedding, she dressed as she always did. The habit concealed her features, her posture, her past. She traveled to the estate among the crowd, unremarkable and unchallenged. The gates stood open, just as the article had promised. Security was visible but relaxed, focused on managing guests rather than scrutinizing them. The estate was transformed. Music drifted across the grounds. White linens covered long tables, and champagne flowed freely. The air buzzed with conversation and admiration. Ethan moved through it all with confidence, greeting guests, smiling for cameras, the image of a man at ease with his future. Marianne watched him from a distance. She did not approach immediately. She waited. She observed the timing, the structure of the ceremony. She waited until the guests were settled, until the officiant had finished speaking, until the microphones were active and attention was unified. When the moment came, she stepped forward. The movement was sudden enough to draw notice, but not alarm. She ascended the low stage with deliberate calm, ignoring the murmurs that followed. A security guard shifted, uncertain. Before anyone could stop her, Marianne reached for the microphone. She lowered her hood. Recognition hit Ethan instantly. The color drained from his face as though someone had pulled the life from him in a single motion. His expression fractured, confusion giving way to horror, then to a terror so naked it could not be concealed. His bride turned toward him, startled by the sudden shift in his demeanor, then back to Marianne. The crowd fell silent. Marianne's voice, when she spoke, was steady. "I have only 3 words for the bride," she said, her gaze fixed on the woman beside Ethan. "Please remember this." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You are marrying a rapist and a child killer." The words landed with devastating clarity. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed nervously, uncertain. Others stared in disbelief. Ethan lunged forward instinctively, but security moved faster this time. restraining him as chaos erupted around the stage. Marianne did not resist when guards took her arms. As they led her away, she turned once more toward the bride. There was no hatred in her expression, only certainty, the kind that does not seek validation. Behind her, the ceremony collapsed entirely. Guests argued. Phones came out. Whispers became accusations. Ethan's parents rushed forward, shouting orders that no one followed. The carefully constructed image of respectability shattered in real time, unraveling under the weight of a truth that could no longer be contained. Marianne was escorted from the grounds without protest. She had said what needed to be said. Whatever came next, investigations, consequences, disbelief, no longer belonged to her alone. The silence that had protected Ethan for so long was broken, and this time, it would not be restored. The aftermath unfolded faster than anyone had expected, and far beyond the gates of the Caldwell estate. Within hours of the disrupted wedding, footage circulated across social media. Guests' recordings captured Ethan's reaction, the panic in his eyes, the precise words spoken into the microphone. What had been intended as a public display of generosity and prestige became a public reckoning. By the next morning, headlines had shifted from society pages to investigative columns. The name Caldwell was no longer framed by success, but by allegations no one could easily dismiss. Political allies distanced themselves first. Donations were returned. Endorsements were quietly withdrawn. The campaign Richard Caldwell had spent years preparing collapsed under the weight of scrutiny. What followed was not a single accusation, but a widening inquiry into the estate, into non-disclosure agreements, into patterns that had long been ignored or quietly managed. Ethan disappeared from public view almost immediately. Behind closed doors, his parents acted swiftly, not out of contrition, but calculation. Faced with mounting pressure and the real possibility of criminal proceedings, they arranged for Ethan to be placed in a private psychiatric institution. Official statements cited exhaustion, substance abuse, and the need for intensive treatment. Unofficially, it was an attempt to contain damage, to redirect the narrative away from accountability and toward illness. It did not work. Civil investigations followed. Former employees came forward. Financial records were examined. The Caldwell logistics empire, once considered untouchable, fractured under regulatory pressure and lawsuits. Contracts dissolved. Assets were frozen. Within a year, the company was dismantled entirely, its operations absorbed or liquidated by competitors and the state. Marianne watched none of this closely. She cooperated when asked. She testified when required. She spoke plainly without embellishment, recounting events exactly as they had happened. Her consistency mattered. Her calm mattered. In the end, it was not spectacle that secured accountability, but the quiet weight of truth repeated without deviation. A substantial financial settlement followed. Marianne accepted it without celebration. Money, she understood, could not return what had been taken, but it could be redirected toward something that mattered. The first place she turned was the convent. True to her promise, she funded the complete restoration of the damaged shelter wing, expanding it, modernizing it, and ensuring it could once again serve women and children escaping violence. The work was done quietly. No plaques bore her name. To Mother Agnes, she explained simply that the space had saved her life once, whether she remembered it at the time or not. Only after that did Marianne begin to think about herself. She reached out to her friends, the ones who had searched for her after her disappearance, who had mourned without answers, who had never truly let go. Their reunion was unguarded and emotional, marked by disbelief and relief in equal measure. Together, they pooled their skills and savings, opening a small beauty salon with only 3 chairs. It was modest. It was enough. The salon became a place not just of work, but of restoration, where conversation flowed easily, where women felt seen, where survival did not have to be explained. Marianne worked there daily, not as an owner set apart, but as a partner among equals. For the first time, her labor belonged to her. She brought her parents to the city soon after. The transition was careful and deliberate. She found them a quiet apartment close to medical care and community services, ensuring stability without isolating them from the life she was building. Her father adjusted slowly, grateful but humbled. Her mother's memory remained fragile, but her joy was unmistakable. Together, they formed something new, not a return to what had been lost, but a life shaped by what remained. Love came later, not as a rescue or a remedy, but as companionship. Marianne met someone who understood boundaries, who asked questions and accepted silence, who respected the space between wounds and healing. Their relationship grew without urgency, grounded in shared purpose rather than escape. Marianne did not frame her story as revenge. What she had done was not about retribution but timing. She had spoken when silence could no longer protect the powerful, when truth carried consequences beyond denial. The peace she found afterward did not come from watching others fall, but from reclaiming her own voice and choosing how it would be used. Her life, once defined by endurance, became defined by intention, and that she knew was the truest form of justice she would ever need.